thanks for joining me, Lacey. You ready to get into some finance stuff of what's going on?
Absolutely. There's a lot going on in
Yeah,
the world of finance. I don't know. I want to say unfortunately, because some of it,
some of it is
I don't know, not
unfortunate.
my favorite.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
the greatest. Like so, right now, we've been having a
Could we
really.
have cued a Disney song for Unfortunate Souls? I feel like we lost an opportunity
There
there.
you go. Oh man. Anyways, so if you guys have been paying attention, the markets have been killing it for the last couple of years. The S&P 500, I think, was up like 30% this year so far. Last year it was around that. It was really high. So that's kind of all starting to cool off now. Today was a good day, but it was it's been kind of cooled down, and a lot of that's just because there's a lot of fear about what's going to happen to the economy starting next year under Donald Trump. So I just wanted to jump into this quick article here with Yahoo Finance. Hang on one second, and we will do this. All right. So this article is just it says souring S&P 500 profits outlook is a bad sign for the stock market rally. So the market's been way up. So here we go. As of this, it's up 0.3% today, 3.8% today. But if you go back and look at just year to date, it's been way up, right? But it's just in the last little bit here, it's taken a dive in the last few days. So Wall Street and analysts are quickly scaling back their forecast for corporate America's earnings growth over the next year, which could pump the brakes on the blistering stock market rally before long. A lot of this comes out of a key indicator known as earnings revision momentum as a gauge of upward to downward changes to expected per share earnings over the next 12 months. It's just what do they think that the earnings are going to be for these businesses, and then they figure it out per share. But that's slumped into negative territory and is hovering near a second worst reading in the past year. Um, let's see. Corporate earnings have been a cornerstone of the stock market's rally for most of the past decade. Souring outlook on profit growth may dent a further S&P 500 advance after this year's run made valuations stretched and positioning elevated. The benchmark has been on track for its second consecutive year of gains, rising more than 20%, and is the most expensive, which is good if you have money in it, right? But the stocks are being set up for a reversal. The big issue heading into 2025 is whether the Fed will be able to continue easing policy and if earnings momentum will favor laggards outside of big tech. So a lot of this comes down to, does it look like earnings are going to keep going up? And if they do, and unemployment stays low and inflation stays low, then the Fed's going to keep cutting rates a little bit and level it out, which means things will be more affordable for like homes, cars, bigger purchases, which would be a huge rally to the boost of the earnings even more. So it's this whole balance where you don't want it to get too hot and too cold. And right now it's been in a nice little Goldilocks zone for a long time, and coming out of the recession and massive inflation, we're kind of coming into what they call a soft landing, which is we're not going to have a recession. It's just going to cool a little bit, but everything's going to stay pretty level. Nobody's going to really notice the difference, right? And that was been kind of the goal. Well, that's kind of all on the table now. So here's the sort of accompanying article. So the Trump win has economists concerned U.S. economy will fail to make a soft landing. Um, so they talk about investors have grown increasingly confident in the U.S. economy will achieve the soft landing, but that's kind of all gone away. So we're in a soft landing. Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, but that ends January 20th because that's when Trump comes into the White House. Trump and his proposed policies have been viewed as potentially more inflationary due to the president-elect's campaign promises of high tariffs on imported goods, tax cuts for corporations, and curbs on immigration. Now you can read the rest of this article; it's actually pretty good, and they go through the expectations, the inflationary spiral that they expect from tariffs, the other big inflationary spiral that they get into in this article, which I think is the most important, is if they start deporting people, like massive deportations, even if they just start like televising like even their standard raids and stuff like that, and they try to make it real scary, you're going to see immigration, especially, come down. legal and
And
illegal.
that's going to be bad for your wallet. Let's be super clear. That is bad for your wallet.
It's going to be really expensive because what people forget is a lot of our food and the farming and the manufacturing and stuff in this country is done by immigrant workers because they're willing to take lower wages just for the chance to be in the country. So if
Right.
these people start getting deported or leaving or they're afraid to come, now you're going to have a situation where yeah, your cost of everything's going to go up because there's not going to be the labor there. So there's either going to be a supply issue or they're going to have to start paying a lot more for labor, which means your costs are going to go up.
Either way, it's bad for your wallet.
Yeah.
Either way, it means you're spending more money on things you used to spend less money on. And then saying, gee, why has everything gotten so much more expensive?
Right.
Well, that's the price you pay for being so freaked out about the border.
Right. And one or two scenarios is going to happen there. So prices start going up because of tariffs or especially if he curbs immigration. If prices start going up, one or two things are going to happen. Either companies are going to demand is going to keep up with it, and companies are going to go, oh well, if demand is keeping up, well we can jack the prices even higher, and they'll price gouge us like they did after the pandemic, and so inflation will get really out of control, like it did after the pandemic. Remember, it got to 9% for a while there, and that'll be bad. Or demand won't keep up, in which case these companies they'll lose earnings, which means they'll have to do more layoffs to save money, and it'll tank the stock market, which is probably the more likely scenario, is that demand won't keep up, and people will start cutting back. So it's kind of a spiral effect. It's not what you want to see, but that is kind of what we're looking at going forward. So just so everybody's gonna get a heads up about that whole situation going on. But I wanted to get into this. So Lacey, found this one. This was you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, but before we go on to that,
Uh,
I'm just going to throw out there because I like to be a solution sort of girl. I was talking to a friend of mine about some of that stuff, and she's very much concerned about what's about to happen to her very literal wallet. She said, before the changing of the guard, so to speak, on January 20th, I am taking advantage of all of the food sales.
mhm.
I'm stocking my chest freezer. Well, I mean, because right now through the holidays, certain kinds of things go on sale.
Discount,
And
yeah.
she's like, I'm stocking my pantry. I've got a chest freezer. I'm going to be stocking those things because she said, I think this is going to get expensive for the wallet based on some of these things that are about to happen. So, you know what? If you all have a living situation that has that sort of space in it, maybe that's a way you try to get ahead of you're probably not going to be able to do a lot
Sure.
about some of the things that are going to happen to prices, but you can get ahead of a few things, you know?
Yeah, it's also a good time to double check your budget and look for where if things get tough, where you might be able to cut back a little bit if you need to. For those
Right.
of you who have money invested in the stock market or your 401k or something, it might be time to maybe rethink some of the investments. Typically, in down markets or slower markets or recessions, things like value stocks, right? So you don't have to. I mean, value stocks are basically they're usually larger companies or bigger stocks that we think are underpriced, but they tend to do well in down markets because they're huge. I mean, they can weather the storm and still keep business going, right? As opposed to smaller businesses, recessions are really devastating because they don't have as much cash on hand, right? So
Right.
those kinds of companies, blue chip companies, big companies like that. So if you look for like value stock funds or blue chip stock funds, those tend to do well in down markets, and it's good to have some of those in there with your growth funds and other things. Do you have some comment on
Speaking,
it? Go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of not much cash on hand,
Okay. Oh,
like that.
speaking of, yeah,
That
there you go.
segue.
Go for it. So
See, maybe I should introduce more segments. I think I make better segues than
you're
you
better. That
do.
was a better one than usually I do.
That
Go
was a
ahead.
better segue.
So go ahead.
Speaking of not much help on hand, um, so I found this really interesting little piece here about millennials and the choices that they are making that are different from the generations before them in a number of arenas. And I thought it would be fun if we maybe take a look at some of the argument because millennials, people love to compliment them for how smart they are, and simultaneously, they like to rag on them for the life choices they are currently making. So I thought it might be fun to zoom in on some of these and Duncan and I can, offer our opinions. We
Well,
haven't discussed this with each other, so I guess I don't know if we're going to agree or not.
Gen Z, just get ready because this is a lot of you too, and it's gonna get worse. So yeah, so we'll jump into this.
So hold on. You know what? I'm not using my I've got a crystal for that mug. I've
Right.
got I've got grumpy. I've got grumpy here. I should have had that because we're going to look into our crystal ball and tell you what we think is coming down the pipeline for
4 years
the
at
next.
least. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I will say this for Gen Z, this is already starting to affect them, and then it is covered in this video that Lacey covered. But yeah, let's jump into this. So this is about millennials actually staying and living with their parents, so multi-generation households. So yeah.
About 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents. And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend isn't new.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save, but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy. 27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
So a lot of this video is about kind of her perspective, but we've talked about this a lot on the show, which is wages have been flat for a long time. They haven't grown much, but costs have, and inflation's been going up. Whatever 3.5% I think is the average right now. And then if you do, you factor in, okay, college costs are 8-9 times what they used to be. So just to get an education in the workforce is way more expensive, and housing is 5 or 6 times what it used to be as compared to real income. So just surviving anymore is more difficult. Plus, you need more stuff. You got to have a computer, a cell phone. You got to have all these extra expenses. So, yeah, I think it's drained a lot of people, and it makes sense that you'd have a multi-generational household. So, like when I lived in Hawaii, most people live, and it's 2 or 3 generations in a household. Grandma and grandpa.
Quite frankly, we're one of the few cultures that doesn't do that. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to do that.
No.
Mom, I love you. Not that I think she's watching. But Mom, I love you, but I don't want to live with my mother.
Right.
I don't. I don't want to live with my grandmother. Don't want to live with my mother. I don't have any kids, but I can assure you, if I did, once they're adults, I want them to go somewhere else and live.
Right.
I don't want to live multi-generationally. That being said, we're in the minority for sure of people across the world.
Right.
More people are living multi-generational than we do.
Right, and the other thing about it is we've gotten into this from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s through the 80s and 90s. This idea of the nuclear family, right? The parents and the kids. And then when the kids grow up, leave, and they have kids, but it's not these multi-generational, which used to be more normal. And in a lot of places it is normal. Like I said, when I lived in Hawaii, it is so freaking expensive housing there because it's an island. There's not that much space. So it's not unusual to have 3 or 4 generations in a house. Right? So they get like bigger houses so everybody can fit, but it's a lot of people. But I can tell you right now, just like renting an apartment, like a studio, a really crappy studio apartment was the first apartment I had there for the first 6 months I was there. That was like $2,200 a month, and that was what? That was what, 15, 16 years ago?
Mm.
I mean, it's got to be phenomenal today. So I think the problem too is the mentality is that that's not acceptable, or you're lazy, or you're mooching if blah blah, blah, as opposed to no, you're just being pragmatic. And I want to jump to this because this is this woman's aunt. We'll jump to her a couple times because the aunt has this sort of opinion.
Afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya. 36% of Americans said in a 2022 survey that more young adults living with their parents is bad for society. So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the U.S. economy.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old, and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated from the University of Miami in 2019 and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
After I saw the cost of living and things like that after I graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
Which is true. I think that's fair. But you see her mother's house is huge. So
Okay, but that also sounds pretty entitled. I'm going to take a little opposite approach here.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty entitled. I can't live the life I want. I can't have the lifestyle. You know, like, sorry, it took me a lot of years to get to have anything that would even qualify as being called a lifestyle.
sure, but
That's just called being young and broke.
yeah, but the difference is that if you were young and broke in the 80s or 90s, you could have that lifestyle in 10 or 15 years. Now it's very, very difficult unless you come from money. So like in her situation, she's very, very privileged. Look at the house her mother has. Right?
Yeah, well, and I forget where in this segment is. Maybe we're getting to it, and maybe I'm spoiling, but it seems that the case is that if I remember correctly, she's like banking everything that would go to rent. She's not even contributing to the parents.
No, I mean, but that's their
household
situation.
initially. I mean,
That's theirs.
But it's very privileged. I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
No.
This one's pretty privileged.
Yeah, she's kind of an interesting example in that sense where it's like mom and dad don't expect her to contribute, which is, whatever. But, a lot of people don't have that luxury. So you think about it from a perspective of somebody who mom and dad don't have a big house, or they're not close to their parents, or whatever it is, right? Now it's like, okay, now you're in that same boat she's in, but now you have to rent. So you don't have the ability to save.
Right.
And it's difficult to get ahead. So you're basically just working to pay for shit so you can work to pay for shit. And it's cyclical and you're never getting anywhere. And I can see where, I can't live the life I want to live is not an unfair statement. Because I'm basically just a drone at this point. And that's my existence. I could see where I'd be pissed too. I mean,
Well, you know what? Her parents probably feel like they're just a drone too, though. The generation that's older than that probably doesn't feel like they're not that if they're still in the workforce. You know what I'm saying?
No, but they have the shit. They have the house and the car, and they had the wealth built up. They didn't have the stagnant wage problem. Right? And they get into that a little bit later too. But that's the thing, is her parents had the ability to do these things because of the economy and the time period they grew up in. She's grown up in a period where there hasn't been wage growth, any significant wage growth in the last 30 years. So what is she supposed to do in this era, right?
It was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings. This can have ramifications for setting up a financial future.
So, just the debt thing. I know a lot of guys will sit there and go, oh, well, that's their fault for racking up the debt. And it's a lot of times it's like, yeah, but that's not really what happens. What happens is they needed it for an emergency. They needed, new tires for their car or something like that, and they just couldn't pay it back because they don't make enough money. So they end up having to take credit because they're living in a deficit half the time. Because when you live paycheck to paycheck, yeah. Go ahead.
That's the truth. Regardless of what generation you're in, that's the truth for a lot of people in the United States. Just in general, like the way frequently it's not shopping might be a little bit of mismanagement for having like a
Sure.
lack of budget in your life, but it's not largely usually a management issue in that people are shopping or whatever. A lot of times it's, you know, something came up that's one of those once in a while things like, oh crap, flat tire, couldn't patch it, need to actually get a new one,
Right.
something with my vehicle, whatever, that kind of stuff. Big, huge vet bill, something, and they couldn't cover it, you know?
Yeah, that's a lot of it. I also get the point about, I don't want to rent. Well, it's like, yeah, I can see where if you don't have to rent, I mean, it'd be better to live with your parents and pay rent to them because at least they're getting some benefit out of it. And they're probably not going to charge you what you'd pay for an apartment, and you'd probably be living a better standard of living. I can see that argument right there.
If both the parents and the adult kids are good with that, I don't mind that solution as so long as the parents are getting some financial help from the kids, because I don't think it's fair for that only to go one direction. Parents spend their entire lives sacrificing and giving to their kids. So if they're going to be giving to the kids in that way, they should also be getting a little bit of financial relief.
Well, right. And in the circumstance where you have a good enough relationship with your parents where you can help them out and give them some rent and, chip in and make it more feasible for everybody, remember, when they die, you're getting that money. So it's really just investing in yourself at that point. So...
Right. It's sort of like the way your equity builds in your house, and you're putting your equity in your parents.
Right.
I mean, but listen, if, I don't know where in New Jersey she is, but if her just renting a room from somebody was going to cost her $1,000 and she's kicking her mom $500 a month, mom's up $500 a month.
Right.
Plus somebody to help with chores around the house, and the kids up $500 a month because that's a $500 a month savings, and everybody's winning.
Yeah.
I don't mind them like that, but some of these stories don't shake out that way. Some of them shake out and younger person sponging off of the parent, and I gotta say, on that one, I'm a little on team stop sponging off of your parent. You got to help them out too.
No, I think it depends too on the situation. Like, it might be that her parents are so rich that it doesn't matter to them. Right?
Yeah, maybe.
They
Hopefully.
Don't really they don't care. The other thing about some of that is, when I know I made it sound selfish, like you're going to inherit the money. The other thing about it is, and it is a little selfish, but it's practical too, which is, and I think about this because I'm an only child, and my parents are divorced, and my father's remarried. So I've got 3 parents that are aging, and I got to think about, oh God, what's it going to cost to take care of them as they get older? And do they have enough money to do it, or is it going to end up coming on me, where it's like, well, either you're helping your parents out or you're sticking them in some really shitty nursing home. Right?
You know what? Or you could scare the shit out of them and tell them that they're both going to have to come and live with you, and they'll have to live with each other again. Oh God, you should really do that. That's such a good idea.
I've done that. They don't like that one.
I like that one. You should do that one all the time.
I do. They don't find it funny, but we do. I mean, but...
I can imagine your parents' reaction to it. Not a lot of amusement at all, especially your mother. I don't think your mother would be too pleased.
No, I think they'd rather I just kill them. So, yeah, excuse me.
I think so.
But yeah, no, but yeah, it depends on the circumstance. But that's what you got to think about that stuff too. And I know, like, for younger people, you don't think about it, but, like, trust me, you start to get in, like, your 30s and 40s, and your parents start getting old, you start going, oh, shit, what am I going to do with these people? I mean, they're going to get old. I can't, can they pay for themselves? Can they take care of themselves?
And if you're somebody that has kids, you have 2 sets of little people. Old people start getting littler, and then there's the little people you created, and you got to figure out what to do with all of them and how to finance all of it.
Right, and even though we were joking about it, that does happen where your thought is, okay, well, if they're going to get old and they can't really take care of themselves, maybe they have to come live with you or stay in a nursing facility. Nursing facilities are expensive. like a decent nursing home, you're paying $6,000 a month. And that's a decent one. That's not even a nice one. Right? So you got to factor all that in. And if they want to get like Medicaid or something, which we'll get into, which is probably going to get cut some, like in their old age, they have to be broke to get that, which means you're not getting any inheritance. So all the money's bled out. Right? So you got to factor in how you want to handle these things going forward. But like Lacey said, if you got kids too, it's like, yeah, maybe grandma and grandpa could come stay with you and take care of your kids. And then, you know, maybe that's the case in 20 years. That's what she'll be doing. This girl in the video. But,
Maybe.
it could be. But, yeah, so let's skip to, because I want to jump to a couple of the parts here. So let's go to this part here.
Into savings, my mentality is why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to own? And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a
So just so she's saving for a house. That's why they're doing this.
house.
Young adults ages 25 to 34 in high cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly 26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022, while
So that's, I would say, the median income. So I want to clarify this because everybody thinks, don't confuse median and average. Median means 50% of everybody made that or less. That amount, what was it again? It was 130 something.
Yeah.
Yeah, hang on. See if I can find it again. 132,723. So 50%. So the average was probably a little higher. Average is always higher than the median, but that's what the median income is. So that's the bottom half of people are making that or less. Right? So I just want to put a pin in that. That's a lot of money because nationwide, the median is like 55,000. So this is a really rich part of the world that we're living in.
in 2022,
It's
while
also
the
an
median
expensive
value
part
of a
the world
home
because
Yeah.
while I'm New York City, you know, I work with a lot of people that actually live in New Jersey, and New Jersey is not a cheap place to live either.
No.
The spaces are much larger than what we have here in this city, and that's what they're getting for it. But they're not really getting a cheaper cost of living. They're getting more space, blah blah, lots of tolls, bigger commute. You know, like
Right.
it's expensive over there.
Right, and it depends on where you're at because we've had this discussion before where like 6 figures in New York is different than 6 figures in Portland. 6 figures in Portland is pretty good money. 6 figures in New York is, you know, you got to be a little bit more practical about how you spend your money.
Right.
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 So, but yeah, it depends on where you're at. Like, I've had that before. Like, I have clients that live in Mexico, and it's like, oh yeah, they're living on their interest from their retirement. They're getting whatever 30 or 40,000 a year, but 30 or 40,000 a year in Mexico is a shit ton of money. Right. As we're here, it's barely enough to survive. So, but yeah, look at this. The median house, 644,000. Jesus.
in the region was around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that is just, that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible. My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always...
Well, and we'll get into that in a second, and she's talking about fighting with her aunt. We'll get into that, because that's actually a good scene here. But the whole deal about that is, she's right, is $70,000 back in the 90s, when her parents were coming up, and in the 90s, they had a good chance that they were going to make over 100 pretty quickly. Because wages were still increasing, because it's still the dot-com era, all that stuff, right? Markets are way, way up. You know, markets were booming in the 90s. So, in that era, yeah, $70,000, you could get a decent home loan at whatever 3 or 4% interest. Yeah, you could get it. The $300,000 home wasn't a big deal. But an equivalent to today's dollars, it's not physically possible, depending on how you break it down. But you got to sit there and go, well, $70,000 in 95 is very different than $70,000 a day, right? And the house prices are very different. So here's her aunt bitching at her, and I think this is kind of funny because it gets to kind of a revelation about why this happens.
Saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something to her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria had brought up some conflict with her aunt a few times.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. Like, we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
But you have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport your first time.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
Did you want it? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore. Where am I finding a $270,000
I'm
house?
not making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
In 1995, $70,000 was the equivalent of $145,000 today.
Yeah, look at that.
See, it's different when you put it in perspective, dollar to dollar.
Okay, but you know what? I'm going to say I agree with the aunt on some perspectives because, this girl, and I'm not saying all people in her generation are like that, but there are plenty, this girl thinks she should be able to buy a place in that town right there. And, quite frankly, when we got our first apartment or bought our first places, they weren't always in the like super great, awesome part that we wanted for our forever places. We kind of had to make some compromises to be able to sort of eke ourselves in somewhere.
Right. Well,
I do think that she has ideas that she should be able to just start off in, a certain level of place that's not always true.
Well,
People in the previous generations didn't frequently as well.
Well, I agree with you, and I agree with her on this point, which is that's what she's doing. She's living with her mom to try and get there. She's not starting off where she wants. So, I mean, you can look at it either way. She could, the answer, you could go, rent the apartment and whatnot, but could she save the money to get to where she wants to go? She'd probably have more freedom in the apartment. Her boyfriend or her would have more privacy. They'd probably be happier there, but they wouldn't have the money. They wouldn't be able to save to get to where they want to get. So, I mean, there's a trade-off here.
Even the first place they buy does not need to be in the fancy, rich, uppity sort of area. That's my point.
I don't know about the issue. I mean, the issue is they don't have the money, period. Now, you're right. They could, if she's being ridiculous, I want to get the $600,000 house. They can't really afford that. So it's kind of stupid to talk about. So, but if she's talking about, I think the argument there was, the aunt was saying, well, you're not going to live in this nice neighborhood to start out with, right, with oceanfront or whatever it was. And then she points out, well, yeah, but you did right out of the gate. So don't lecture me about having to make sacrifices when I'm living with my mother to try and save money.
Okay, but at the same time, I don't know the answer to this, but was oceanfront then what it is now? A lot of times, neighborhoods that become freaking amazing I'm not saying it was even rough, but like maybe weren't as amazing. You
Well,
know
no.
what I mean?
Well,
Like maybe it wasn't as expensive of a place comparatively. I
Well,
don't
no,
know.
but this
I don't have any friends or
it's the perspective though that I'm trying to get at here. Because look at the ant here where they
$35,000
talk
a
about
year, that
this.
was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house.
What's
They
this?
just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
What you wanted? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore.
See, that's what it would be today. So 270, yeah, $70,000. That's what it would be today. The other thing she's not factoring in is this. Back then, she didn't have the student loan payments that this girl probably has. On top of that fact, she doesn't have the extra costs. I mean, cars are more expensive. Just generally, gas is more expensive. All this stuff, right? And the other factor she doesn't factor in is when she got that house for $270, she's getting a first-time home loan with all the benefits of that. Plus, she's probably getting it at 3 or 4% interest. As where this girl's looking at 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even comparable to sit there and go, well, I was only making this and you're making this. No. And if you compare apples to apples, you were making probably 40% more than her, and the costs were probably about half or less than half. I mean, you can't compare the two. That's what I think was the whole big point of this and the argument. So it makes sense that you would have to be practical and people are cutting back. And that's why they're doing it. I'm just saying, I think it's a stigma to sit there and say, you know, you need to shut up and take it. And I think that's part of the problem here. And I think that's a lot of what's led to a lot of what's going on right now, just socially and publicly, is that we're not getting what our parents got. And the distribution of wealth is so staggered anymore. Income inequality, wealth inequality is so incredible.
I agree with that, but I also think there's a certain amount of this generation that can have inflated expectations about what they should be able to be doing right out of the gate.
Sure, but that's
there's a starter car, a starter whatever, and sometimes we also have to reel back in our expectations for the very first thing. You know,
I think that's every generation when they're young. I'm not going to knock one generation or another. I think that's every generation when they're young. Because the bottom line is...
No, but we're currently addressing, this one.
No, I know. But the thing about it is that it also depends on what your living circumstances are, how much money your parents had, what the opportunity is to grow and get ahead. And there's just not that much anymore. And it would be one thing to sit there and say, well, you have too high expectations, but knowing that you're in a good economy and a good market and your education didn't cost that much and you don't have that much expense, and cost of living is a lot cheaper versus somebody whose cost of living is really high who's making less, and then sit there and go, well, you're just being spoiled. Well, that's easy for you to say when you were in a much better position, so you're the one who's spoiled. It's like the spoiled kid telling the kid who has nothing that you just need to shut up and take it. And I think that's the problem in that interaction. Is I don't think that goes anywhere. Because they still have to somehow survive and figure it out. So, anyway, it's interesting. Interesting stuff. I think there's too much of a stigma, though, on people having to do that. I mean... I've had clients where it's like, my kid's in this situation, it's like maybe they lived with you for a while. Until they can get on their feet. And then of course, pandemic and recession and all that doesn't help. But, you look at the Great Depression, that was what was going on. So, kind of interesting stuff. Do you have anything else you want to throw in there? Or?
Nope.
No? Okay. Well, since we're talking about that, let's talk about some of the cuts that we can look forward to coming forward. So now that we have Donald Trump is going to be president again in January on the 20th, he gets inaugurated, and he's got a lot of plans for cutting things and tariffs. But the big ones that are going to come down the pipeline right away that we need to be worried about are cuts to healthcare, which are going to come pretty quick starting next year. So just want to make sure everybody's ready for that. So here's just a quick article. So it just Vance, Trump's healthcare plan is to let insurers charge more for pre-existing conditions. So they're looking at what the plans were, essentially. They haven't given anything in detail, but we know certain things are coming down the pipeline for sure. So Donald Trump infamously said that presidential debate he had concepts of a plan to replace Obamacare. So for those of you who don't remember, he said he was going to replace Obamacare back in 2016. He said it all through his presidency. We got a new plan. We got a new plan. It's going to be better than ever. It's the better than everybody gets health care, blah, blah, blah. Said that for 4 years. It was coming out next week. Every time he said it was next week, next month, it's coming out, it's coming out, it's coming out. Mañana, mañana, mañana. Never happened. Right? But they tried to cut Obamacare completely and get rid of it. And they couldn't because it's too popular. But but now they have the House and Senate, so it'll be a lot easier. So J.D. Vance came up with not only a surprising, but if understood properly, far more damaging than Trump's original statement. The Trump plan, according to Vance, is to permit insurance companies to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. So Vance explained the Trump plan during the interview with NBC's Kristen Welker. He, of course, does have a plan for how to fix American health care, but a lot of it goes down, Kristen, to deregulating insurance markets so that people can actually choose a plan that makes sense for them. Vance is advocating a partial or complete return to the system that existed before Obamacare. In that world, prior to 2014, it was very difficult to find affordable coverage unless you were on Medicare, Medicaid, or got insurance through your employer. There was a market for individual insurance, and it was possible to buy plans if you don't get coverage through a government plan or through work. But that market was dominated by adverse selection. So for those of you who don't know, in the insurance industry, especially in healthcare, they rate you, healthcare and life insurance, they rate you from either an A to a G. And I think A is the best. So if you're an infant with no health problems, you're an A quality. Because the odds that you're going to get sick or die are lower, right? In life insurance. In healthcare, if you're an infant, you're probably going to get sick. So you're probably a C or a D. And then that's how they gauge what your insurance rate's going to be. Is they classify you into these categories based on what they think the risk is. So adverse selection is when you're an F and H or a G because you are really down on the scale. So it doesn't do me any good to insure Lacey. Lacey has cancer and she comes to me for health insurance. I'm probably going to say no. Why? Because the odds are I'm going to be paying her more to pay for her health insurance and she's going to be paying me in premium. So I'm going to be losing money. So why would I invest in that? It's too high a risk. It's just if you have a triple bypass, and I've seen this before, guy has a triple bypass, he's knocking on death's door and he wants to buy life insurance. You're like, yeah, no, nobody's going to sell you life insurance. Because the odds that you're going to die soon and they're going to pay out more is almost guaranteed. Right? So that's how insurance works. They can't, unless there's a chance to make money, they're not going to do it. So they avoid that kind of stuff. So when Obama came in, they did that whole thing about pre-existing conditions, and it was a big deal. It forced insurance companies to take people they normally wouldn't take, which is not profitable. But what it did on the other side of that was Obama wanted to put in the individual mandate and pressure people, especially younger people, to join in, because now if Lacey comes in and she's an adverse selection because she's got cancer, but you're like, okay, so you got to cover Lacey. And I'm like, well, I'm the insurance company. I'm like, well, that sucks. I don't want to do that. But then they're like, yeah, but we're going to bring in these 200 other young people who are healthy, who are not likely to get sick. And you got to cover them too. Well, now I'm getting all their premium. It offsets it. It's fine. But what they're saying is, let's take that away. Where you're also forcing me to not just take Lacey, but all these other people come with her to make it affordable for me as the insurer. Vance is saying, no, we're going to take that away and let everybody choose whatever they want, which means me as the insurer, now I'm not covering those people. So now a lot of people, and just an estimation, you're looking at 25 million people are going to lose insurance that are sick. So that's what that pressure is, and there's a good chance they'll get that passed through. So,
Oh yeah, most likely, almost completely that they will get that passed.
yeah. Well, and part of what helps that is the I got this article from Yahoo, why the Affordable Care Act is in real trouble this time. So this is what's happening coming up. All right. So far, GOP leaders have been vague about what's exactly they might do. During his debate, the president-elect said he had concepts of a plan. Let's see. But there's one key reason to think that this time it will turn out differently. A major expansion to the Affordable Care Act's insurance subsidies passed by the Biden administration is currently expected to expire after 2025, which will lead to large premium and deductible increases for many Americans who get their health coverage through program exchanges. So if you've got your health coverage through a program exchange or you have Medicaid, a lot of those subsidies that the government put in to lower your insurance cost are gone after 2025. So that means Republicans can pare back Obamacare without lifting a finger. But the looming subsidy cliff might also give a party political cover to make broader changes that would otherwise be difficult for moderate lawmakers to swallow. So what happened was Democrats temporarily made Obamacare insurance tax credits more generous as part of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. Those changes to the law subsidies, which lower the cost of health coverage purchased on federal marketplaces, knocked premiums to zero for many lower-income families, while further limiting their out-of-pocket expense. So a lot of people right now that normally wouldn't have coverage, and they're not paying anything for it because the government subsidized it. That expires, now all of a sudden they're either going to lose the coverage or they're going to have to start paying the premium, which could be, depends on the person, it could be anywhere between $500 to $1,500 a month, which is going to be devastating. And in order to keep that in place, the Republicans might come back and go, well, if we're going to do that, let's just overhaul the whole thing, which could be even more worse or devastating. So, and I misquoted. It's not 45, it's 25, it's 45 million Americans. Sorry. So that's a fourth of the working population almost. It's like 40%. Or 24%, something like that. So get ready for that. If you're making less than $70,000 a year, get prepared that you might have to start paying for your health care that you were otherwise getting by without. And if you have kids, this is really, time to be a little bit scared. Maybe I'm understating that. A lot scared. So that's what's going on with that. Let's see. With the who's going to cover that? We could do this. The Medicaid expansion. Yeah, we can skip that for now. So that was that. So let's see. Hang on, I'm having a delay here. So with the Medicaid, yeah, they're not going to do the Medicaid expansion, so that's going to be a big deal. So what happened was when they did Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, Obama also put in an expansion for Medicaid with all these states and said, okay, we're going to cover and pay for Medicaid, right? And what happened was there was a big expansion in that gap, what they called the pay gap, because most people don't qualify for Medicaid. You have to be poor. I think it's like for a single person, you got to be making less than $17,000 a year to qualify for Medicaid, and for a family, it's like less than 30 or 35. So you have to be making nothing. Well, there's a lot of people between that amount and 60, 70,000 that can't get health insurance, or if they can, it's just way too expensive, because even for like a single guy like me, it's about like $1,200 a month.
Sure. I mean, imagine you're a single person, you're making $30,000 a year, you make too much to get on to, the
Right.
state plan. And how on $30,000 a year are you going to be able to afford a $7,000 a year insurance plan?
Oh, more like 12. Yeah.
It was 7 with all of these great subsidies.
Yeah.
That's what it looked like with the subsidies, and all of that stuff's going to go away, right?
Right.
But even currently, where it's like $7,000 a year, that's already like a quarter of your freaking income, right there, and that's about to go up.
Well, yeah, and the expansion on the subsidies covered a lot of that 7, so you weren't paying hardly anything. So now all of a sudden that's all going to go away. So now you either have no health insurance, unless you can get it through your employer. But if you're making less than 50, your employer probably not covering health coverage. And we covered that before. Less than half of American workers have jobs that cover health coverage. So now you're really screwed. And as anybody who knows, you get one negative. You have to go to the hospital for something, you break your leg or whatever, you don't have health insurance, now you're $25,000-$30,000 in debt and that you can't afford. Number one cause of bankruptcy is medical costs. Yeah. But those are going to go way back up again, boys and girls. The other thing on top of that, so not just the Medicaid for lower income people, but food stamps. So I'm going to skip through this article a little bit and get to the food stamps part. So food stamps. The Republicans have been trying to cut SNAP forever. So SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is food stamps, and is perhaps the most important safety net program for people who are very poor. 75% of recipients are at or below the poverty line, and over 1 in 5 report having no other source of income besides food stamps. The share of single parents living on less than $2 a day is nearly 10% before you include SNAP benefits. Food stamps take the number below 3%, slashing it by over 2/3. Because the program grew out of efforts to prop up crop prices, redirecting surplus crops to poor people, it is the province for the Department of Agriculture and is renewed every 5 years in a farm bill. However, the last farm bill was 2018, didn't go into effect till 2019. It ends. And it expired on September 30th. So they're writing the new farm bill will be what they're doing next year. So Glenn Thompson, the Republican chair of the House Ag Committee, released his proposal farm bill in May. Its the most striking provisions would limit the ability of the Department of Agriculture to update its thrifty food plan, upon which SNAP benefits levels are based. This would amount to a $30 billion cut over a decade, and in response to the Biden administration updating the thrifty food plan, which resulted in a nearly 30% hike in the benefit levels. So right now, a lot of people are getting food stamps. A family of 3 is probably, like, just in Oregon, I looked it up, a family of 3 is probably getting anywhere between $600 to $800, depending on where they live in Oregon, a month for groceries. So that covers quite a bit. And then if you add WIC into that, now that's survivable. That's food for 3 people, and diapers and formula and all that stuff. Now that's going to get cut to probably about $300 or $400, back to what it was pre-pandemic. $300 or $400 is nothing for a family of 3.
No.
That's not going to cover anything. So these people are going to be really hurting.
Yeah, that would be me, for one.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So just so you know, that's kind of what we're looking at going forward. You're going to be looking at higher unemployment, more poverty, more kids going hungry, more people without health care, more credit debt, medical debt, things like that. And you're not going to be looking at an ultra robust market going over the next 4 years. So it's going to be, we could be wrong. Maybe it all works out. Maybe Trump pulls it out and does a great job. And if he does, we'll give him credit for it. Believe you me, we will give him credit. But that's not what it looks like, and that's not what their plans are. Their plans are to make horrible cuts. So that's what we all got looking forward to in the near future. So.